Chris Rock's Selective Outrage. This is Chris Rock's latest comedy special that came out in March of 2023. And for those of you listening to this segment right now, be completely forewarned that there will be heavy spoilers in my little recap and review. I definitely adhere to that comic code of not giving away a comic's bits before they're recorded on the special. When I do these recaps and reviews, obviously they're based on when a comedian has put out a comedy special for the most part. But in this case, the special is out, and if you haven't seen it yet, now's your chance to skip over this, fast forward, etc. And if you don't, that's on you. Selective Outrage is Chris Rock's 6th comedy special. To me, it was definitely better than Tambourine Man. I think it was Tambourine, actually, that he put out back in 2018. And the only reason that I'm hesitant in saying that it's his best special to date is because I'm cognizant of the recency bias of me having just seen it. And, I haven't seen Bring the Pain or Bigger and Blacker in like so many years. But those are classic Chris Rock specials with iconic bits within them. So I would have to rewatch just to see how they hold up in comparison. But if it wasn't for that, I would say that this is Rock's best special to date, which would be dope if objectively true and just be a reflection of those other ones from 1996 and 1999 respectively being a couple of decades older, meaning that he's had a couple of decades since to work on and perfect and continue molding his creative craft, and it definitely shows. But before telling you guys about some of my favorite bits from the special, just wanted to add some context around it, which is, first off, it was Netflix's first live comedy special. To my knowledge, it was also the first time that a stand-up comic streamed what was intended to be a recorded, polished comedy special, streamed it live. Because for those of you that didn't watch it live, you can definitely go back and watch the recording of it. But most comics obviously do 3, 4, sometimes 5 recordings of a specific set and then just edit out and mash together whatever the best parts were. So if a certain bit hit better during the first recording and then a different bit hit better during the third recording, they would take the pieces out of those better versions of those bits. And what we see as the consumer is that polished best version of all of those bits and jokes. And rightfully so, right? It's a comedy special, not just like a comedy show that you're going to watch. The only similar one that I know of, and it's not even the same thing, but I would say Tony Hinchcliffe's One Take special that he put out on YouTube, I believe. And it was just a one-shot recording of a comedy special that he put out, but I'm not sure if any editing and stuff like that took place after the fact. And if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't a live stream either. So this special by Chris Rock, Selective Outrage, is definitely unique in that respect as well. And it literally went head to head with a big UFC card. UFC, I think it was 285, 286. It was John Jones's return after a 3-year hiatus. John Jones, the GOAT of GOATs when it comes to MMA. He was on a 3-year hiatus, and in his return was going up a weight class from being the reigning undisputed light heavyweight champ, going up to heavyweight for the first time. So a lot of us that were fans of both are kind of torn between the two. I definitely went with watch the first ever Chris Rock live comedy show. I went that route and then caught the fight after the fact, which turned out to be a good choice. And in my opinion, the fight lasted a minute or something like that. And yes, John Jones won. Spoiler alert there. But it was dope. It was such a good special. And like most folks, we were all anticipating what we knew, we assumed, and some of us may have heard through the grapevine of other comics and folks speaking about Chris Rock during his touring. His official, if you want to call it that, response to the slap heard around the world, which was, of course, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock while he hosted the Oscars last year in 2022. So I definitely wanted to tune into that. Me personally, those of you that listen to this podcast know where I stand on that entire situation. I made a deep dive or breakdown, if you will, of what happened, my reaction to it, etc. If you guys want to go back and check that out, or I'll definitely link to it in the episode notes. If you guys want to check out that specific clip, best place to do that is on my YouTube page. But in a nutshell, it was obviously wrong and fucked up of Will to do something like that. Definitely saw a crack in his armor there of this excellence that he's portrayed throughout his very long spanning career. That was just a sad thing to see from that perspective. And more importantly, doing it to anyone, but doing it to someone as iconic as Chris Rock was kind of like, what the fuck, bro? And I think most of us were very much so anticipating what the response would be. Even the folks that were kind of like, oh, that was like over a year ago, who gives a shit anymore? I feel like the energy shifted from that to this was the response we didn't know we wanted. But I, for one, definitely wanted to get his perspective and his take firsthand of that situation. And he did a great job, I thought, of foreshadowing his response to the situation throughout the entire special. He like sprinkled little hints at it throughout and definitely built up the anticipation that way. And it does suck. Just one thing that sucked was that a great joke that he has within that like segment of the special leaked like a day or two before. Like someone put it out and I knew it was coming, and definitely wasn't like unique in that. And it was related to the emancipation joke, which I'll circle back to in the end. But even with that joke leaking, like it still hit. It was still hilarious. And that's just again a testament to how good this special is. Now, without that entire piece of the Will Smith slap rebuttal, it still, in my opinion, stands alone as an amazing special. So let's get into a couple of my favorite bits from it. So the title of the special, again, is called Selective Outrage. And that's the theme throughout the entire special. And definitely ties into the whole Will Smith slap thing at the end. But he points out how we see people being selective about their outrage in a lot of different ways. Like, for example, somebody that'll still play Michael Jackson music, but not play R. Kelly. And he's like, same crime, same type of crime, but one of them just had better music. And he made a point of highlighting how everybody's full of shit in their own way. And so is every business, which I couldn't agree more with. It's like sometimes I feel like businesses are just like sticking their finger in the air, see which way the wind is blowing in terms of what will ultimately yield our investors more money. And we'll do whatever that thing is. Not to mention their fiduciary responsibility to increase shareholder profits. But I digress. He touches on that point and he says he bumped into his boy Fred that he hadn't seen in a bunch of years. And he was like, yo, Fred, what's up, man? How you been? How you doing? And he was like, yeah, I started this new job and it's great. You know, I finally feel seen. They're really inclusive. And, you know, like all the PC terminology being like overly used now in some cases. He's like, yeah, Fred was like, you know, I feel seen, you know, they're really inclusive. I finally have a voice. And Chris is like, nigga, it's me. Like, why are you bullshitting me? What do you think? I'm wearing a fucking wire or something? And he has this hilarious bit tying to the same thing, having to do with Lululemon and how they sell $100 yoga pants. And he was like, at every Lululemon, there's a sign that says, we don't believe in racism and sexism and et cetera, et cetera. And he makes the point of saying, I don't give a fuck about your politics, which is so true. And it's like everyone, including myself, I know I'm guilty of this also, but everyone has to have an opinion about everything. And now every business has to weigh in on everything. It's like, do what it is that you guys do. You make dope yoga pants, do that. You don't have to advertise your thoughts and feelings about everything else. Especially if it's, again, circling back to the whole certain businesses being full of shit and so transparently doing things because it's the right thing to advertise at this particular point in time that will increase the bottom line. And Rock is like, you guys are selling $100 non-racist yoga pants. We'd rather you sell us $20 racist ones that just say nigga to us every time we walk by. Oh, man. And he's like that, you know, everybody, we're in a culture right now where everybody is trying to be a victim. He says the ER is filled with people with paper cuts. He touched on the Capitol riots and he was like, white men been complaining lately like they're losing the country. And he was like, to who? He was like, you ain't losing that shit to us. He was like, we got some vodkas and a couple record companies. He's like, y'all motherfuckers trying to take the country back from who? From yourselves? And this next one was great. He is speaking about like Meghan and Harry, the couple that split from the royal family or whatever. And it was such an important point, I thought. Hilarious in and of itself as a bit, but he said that, you know, like such like to do was made of the racism within the royal family and what Meghan said she had to deal with. And he highlighted one, it's the British fucking royal family. The motherfuckers that invented racism. Like, what do you expect? That's one. And two, and this is a point that I thought was such a good point, is that he said some of the shit that Meghan went through with the royal family was not racism. It was just some in-law shit. And I think that's definitely important to highlight, because everything doesn't always fall into a black and white bucket. You can't just chalk everything up to racism or chalk everything up to whatever category just because it's convenient for you to categorize it in that way. Everything has nuance. Everything has gray. And there's a quote that I like that kind of speaks to that, which is, I'm going to paraphrase and obviously butcher it, but it's something to the effect of, don't assume a nefarious calculated act has taken place when stupidity could just explain it. Something along those lines. But yeah, that was definitely a good one. I like this one too, which I can definitely co-sign, speaking to like the state of politics, a little social commentary on that. And he's like, Republicans lie, they lie their fucking asses off. But Democrats leave out key pieces of the truth that would lead to a more nuanced understanding. I gotta give a round of applause for that one. That one's so fucking true. It's like one side is like blatantly full of shit, and the other side is very good at leaving out their blame full of shitness. If that makes any sense. He touched on abortion. He goes, ladies, if you have to pay for your own abortion, you should get an abortion. Stop letting these broke ass niggas come in you. Spoke about raising kids. He's like, we're the only animal that have to raise kids for 18 years. Other animals are like 2 to 3 days, and the bird just kicks the baby bird off the branch. It's like, yeah, I hope you can fly. He had a beautiful through line that I loved, having to do with his daughter and his mother. And he mentioned how, I won't give up like all the build up to this, because I think you guys should definitely watch it to get the appreciation of it yourselves. And it's like sprinkled throughout. It's not just like one, bit or whatever, or one joke rather. But he mentions how his mother back in the day, growing up in segregation, couldn't go to a white dentist. That when she was a child, in order to get a tooth removed, she would have to go to the vet. And he made this hilarious but sad and true statement of, I'm not talking about Harriet Tubman. You know what I mean? This isn't some shit from like hundreds of years ago. I'm talking about my mother. Because I think a lot of folks tend to write off, especially nowadays, write off slavery in the US and the Jim Crow South as something ancient. When for some folks, it's literally one generation, if that, removed from where we are now. But then he juxtaposes that with the fact that now his mother is able to fly to Paris to have coffee with her grandchild, who is studying culinary arts in France. How dope is that? Definitely a round of applause for that. And then he capped off the special by addressing the elephant in the room, which was, at the risk of sounding redundant, the whole Will Smith slap at the Oscars fiasco. And you know what? Part of me thinks that the strategy here, from Chris Rock's perspective, in terms of, one, waiting for his special to provide a response, was intelligent from a business financial perspective, because he knew he would have the leverage of so many eyeballs wanting to hear his response. Why give that up for free? Wait until you have a special, leverage how many eyeballs are going to be interested in his response to the situation. Like we all wanted to know right after it happened, what's Chris's response and take and stuff like that. And he could definitely leverage that for more money. But I think, and this is just me speculating, that the idea for doing it as a live streamed special was also to counter any notes from the editor or Netflix choosing to cut something etc. Because one, he wanted to get out his response how he wanted to get it out, and rightfully so. He didn't ask for that situation to happen. He wanted to vent the way he vented. And two, he didn't want the platform or anyone else having any say on what he can or cannot say in relation to that situation. So if that was part of the math that went into deciding to live stream this thing, it definitely makes sense to me from that perspective. So first he goes into how, people asking him after the fact if it hurt. And he was like, of course it fucking hurt. He's bigger than me. This motherfucker plays Ali. I played fucking Pookie. And he did have nice callbacks throughout, which I thought were pretty good throughout his set, like callbacks to like some of his film roles and like stuff like that. And then he highlighted, but I ain't playing no fucking victim. And he was like, everybody was hitting him up and saying publicly as well that Will was a bitch for doing something like that, for doing it to him. And he built it up even more by just being like a little vulnerable in the moment and saying how much he respected Will, how much he loved him. He was like, when he was coming up with Jazzy Jeff and opening up all these rap tours and then being in all these movies and getting bigger and bigger, like I always supported him, always loved him, I fucking looked up to him. And then he was like, he hit me so fucking hard that I still got Summertime ringing in my ears. But then he went hard at him, at Jada, and again, highlighting the theme of selective outrage and speaking to the fact that Will chose to be pissed off at him or like take out other frustrations on Chris that night, but it had nothing to do with Chris. And he was like, Jada was pissed at Chris for hosting the Oscars a few years back when she started this Oscar So White movement because she was pissed that Will didn't get nominated for Concussion. And in the live recording of the special, by the way, he, instead of saying concussion, he said emancipation, but he meant concussion. And he even caught himself and he said, oh, I fucked up the joke there, I meant concussion. But Chris tells the story of how Jada was pissed at him because, he was hosting the Oscars and she started this Oscar So White movement and wanted all the, black folks, black actors and stuff not to go to the Oscars that year or whatever. And Chris was kind of like, fuck that, like I want to host the Oscars. And apparently that's where like a rift started between all of them. And he was like, nobody was picking on this bitch. Speaking about Jada. And he's like, she's pissed that her man didn't get nominated for Concussion. And then this motherfucker gives me a concussion. And then he put the whole public entanglement thing on blast. He was like, I didn't have any fucking entanglements. And then literally just says, for those of you that don't remember, she was fucking her son's friend. And then put this nigga on Red Table Talk on blast and chose to make the whole situation public. And that's when Will started getting like piled on and being called a bitch and all this. And his framing of that situation, which I can't disagree too much on, is that Will, in that moment of choosing to slap him, was acting out on like that pent up frustration and rage that he felt from that entanglement situation, and I'm sure other personal situations between him and Jada and other things in his life. And the whole, feeling like a coward thing that Will describes in his book, like feeling like a coward all his life, not being able to like protect the women in his life, like his mom that used to get beat by his dad, and stuff that he fleshed out in his book that I actually broke down in an older episode here on the podcast. I'll link to in the episode notes for you guys to check out if you're interested. And then he closed it off with the joke that had leaked like a day or two before, which was that he was so hurt and pissed at the situation that he watched Emancipation just to watch Will Smith get whooped. Emancipation, for those who don't know, is a period piece about slavery that Will starred in. And it was released, I believe, on Apple TV. I haven't seen it yet, but definitely one I want to check out. And he was like, this nigga had me rooting for Massa. Before that, I had been rooting for Will all my life. It was such a great special, man. And for folks thinking that he went too hard, that he shouldn't have called Jada a bitch or shouldn't be so angry, it's been a year, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Me personally, I loved it. Like I've been saying, I wanted him to go hard. Like he deserved to be able to go hard in response to what happened to him. And I think that's the important thing to highlight here, right? He didn't cause that to happen. Will Smith slapping him. And what is it? Moore's Law? Is that what it is? Or I'm thinking of something else. But whatever that thing is that says, or is it just inertia? Like an equal, when two objects collide, you can expect an equal opposite reaction. Obviously, I'm a fucking scientist, right, guys? Eloquent. description there. And I'm sure I got none of the terminology correct. But basically what I'm trying to say is that that does not apply to human emotions. You can never control how someone reacts to anything. Meaning, in my opinion, whatever reaction someone gives to any situation, whether you personally think it's an overreaction, an underreaction, or an expected, equivalent reaction, that judgment piece is completely secondary. If you step on someone's shoes and they get pissed to the point that they become a mass murderer and kill your entire family, do I personally think that's an overreaction? Yeah, of course. Do I concede and understand the fact that that is a possible reaction from someone? Yes, of course. You can't look at that and be like, what? He overreacted like that? That's what he did? It's like, that's within the choices for any human being. That's within the realm of possibility. Because again, you cannot control how someone reacts. So that's what I would say to anyone thinking that Chris's response was like too much for whatever reason. And conversely, that Will's initial, action to the situation and slapping Chris Rock, that was an overreaction to that innocuous joke, which I personally agree with, but understand that, yes, that is within the realm of possibility of actions that someone could have. They could overreact to a situation, and that's the piece you can't control. So it is what it is in that sense. Either way, Chris Rock's Selective Outrage was an amazing special and is streaming now on Netflix. Definitely check it out.